Teen vanished during church retreat. 10 years later, her friend's daughter draws something strange. Her daughter's crayon scrawled across the page, a jagged red line against stark white, a slash of angry crimson that bled into the cheap, porous paper. And Sarah felt the air physically punched from her lungs, a silent gasp lodging in her throat like a shard of ice. It was the exact shade of Lily's scarf, the soft wool knitted by Lily's own grandmother, the one clutched in her small, trembling hand the night she walked into the whispering, ink-black pines of Camp Redemption and never, ever came back. 10 years swallowed whole by the indifferent forest, a decade of hollow anniversaries and birthdays marked by wilting flowers laid at the edge of those same woods. The crayon, clutched in 5-year-old Maya's chubby fist, paused, then added a lopsided stick figure girl, dwarfed by monstrous, scribbled trees that leaned inward, their branches like skeletal fingers. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob that threatened to tear through the fragile composure she'd spent a lifetime constructing. 10 years. 10 years of waking in the pre-dawn quiet, Lily's name a ghost on her lips. 10 years of scanning crowds for a familiar face, a flash of auburn hair, the particular way Lily used to tilt her head when she was listening intently. 10 years of the police reports gathering dust, the case growing colder with each passing season, until Lily became more myth than memory, a cautionary tale whispered among new batches of campers, a name etched onto a forgotten plaque. But this red, this specific, vibrant, terrible red, Maya had never seen Lily's scarf. It had vanished with her, a final, defiant splash of color against the encroaching darkness of that fateful night. Sarah had described it, of course, in tearful, fragmented sentences to impassive officers, to well-meaning but ultimately helpless church elders, to her own reflection in the merciless bathroom mirror, but never to Maya. Her daughter knew Lily only as a faded photograph on the mantelpiece, a smiling girl with Sarah's eyes, frozen in eternal youth, a story of a friend who went away. Maya looked up, her brow furrowed in concentration, oblivious to the storm raging within her mother. She said, her small voice clear and untroubled, "I saw her in my dream, Mommy. She was cold." The crayon moved again, adding frantic blue scribbles around the stick figure, a chilling representation of encroaching frost, or perhaps, Sarah thought with a fresh wave of nausea, the icy grip of fear itself. The air in their cozy, sunlit kitchen suddenly felt frigid, the scent of baking cookies cloying and wrong. It was as if the shadows of those distant pines had reached across the intervening years, across miles of paved roads and settled life, to touch them here, in this safe, ordinary place. The drawing lay on the table like an accusation, a portal to a past Sarah had tried so desperately to seal away. The sheer, unnerving accuracy of that single red stripe, a shade she herself had only seen clutched in a lost girl's hand under the weak beam of a failing flashlight, as Lily took those last, fateful steps away from the flickering campfire, away from safety, away from her. How could Maya know? How could this child, born 5 years after Lily disappeared, conjure such a specific, painful detail from the ether of a dream? The room tilted, the cheerful yellow walls seeming to press in on Sarah, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall amplifying into a deafening drumbeat, each tick a hammer blow against the fragile dam of her grief. She remembered the search parties, the dogs whining and losing the scent at the edge of an old, unused logging trail, the volunteers with their grim faces and hopeful words that rang hollow even then. She remembered the damp chill of the forest floor, the way the mist clung to the trees like shrouds, the endless, echoing calls of Lily's name swallowed by the vast, uncaring wilderness. And always, in her mind's eye, that flash of red, the last thing she saw of her best friend. The silence in the kitchen stretched, taut and humming with unspoken dread, broken only by the soft rasp of Maya's crayon, adding more detail to her unnerving masterpiece. Sarah forced herself to breathe, shallow, shaky inhales that did little to calm the frantic bird beating against her ribs. She sank onto a chair, her legs suddenly uncooperative, her gaze fixed on the drawing, the red scarf. It wasn't just any red. It was a deep, arterial crimson, a color Lily had adored, a color that had seemed so vibrant and full of life against her pale skin and dark hair. Now, rendered in wax by her own daughter, it felt like a wound reopened, bleeding fresh grief onto the mundane surface of their breakfast table. Maya, still absorbed, added a small, dark shape near the stick figure's hand. Something clutched, something small and indistinct. "What is that, sweetie?" Sarah managed, her voice a thin tremor, barely audible. Maya didn't look up. "Her special rock," she murmured. "The one with the sparkly bits." Sarah's breath hitched. Lily had a geode, a small, unassuming gray rock that, when cracked open, revealed a glittering cavern of amethyst crystals. She'd found it on a family trip the summer before the retreat, and it had become her most treasured possession, rarely leaving her pocket. It was another detail. Another impossible, intimate detail that Maya, separated by a chasm of time and silence, could not possibly know. Sarah had mentioned the scarf to the police, a prominent, visible item. But the rock? She wasn't even sure she'd remembered to tell them about the rock, lost as she'd been in the maelstrom of her initial shock and despair. It was Lily's secret talisman, her small piece of hidden magic. "Her dreams are very real, Mommy," Maya said, as if sensing her mother's turmoil. "Sometimes the girl talks to me. She says she's waiting. Waiting for what?" The question screamed in Sarah's mind, a silent, desperate plea. But she couldn't voice it, not yet. The implications were too vast, too terrifying. She looked at Maya, truly looked at her, the innocent, trusting eyes, the small, determined set of her jaw as she concentrated on her art. This wasn't a child's idle fantasy, not some half-remembered story twisted into a new shape. There was a clarity to Maya's pronouncements, a calm certainty that chilled Sarah to the bone. The weight of the past 10 years pressed down on her, a physical burden. The unanswered questions, the gnawing guilt. Should she have stopped Lily from walking away from the campfire that night? Should she have gone with her, despite her own childish fear of the dark woods? Lily had been upset, arguing with one of the older counselors, something about wanting to call her parents, a detail that had seemed insignificant at the time, but later swelled with a dreadful importance. She'd said she needed air, needed to walk, just for a minute. Sarah, huddled by the fire, had only nodded, too wrapped up in her own teenage anxieties to register the true depth of Lily's distress. A minute had stretched into 10, then 30, then an hour of rising panic as the counselors organized a hasty search, their voices strained with a forced calm that fooled no one. Now this. A child's drawing, a key forged in the innocent furnace of dreams, threatening to unlock a door Sarah had long believed permanently sealed. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a decade. A fragile, terrifying tendril of hope, so sharp it was indistinguishable from pain. But hope for what? For answers? For closure? Or for something more? Something that defied all reason, all logic? The drawing remained, a silent testament. The red scarf, the sparkling rock, the girl in the cold, Lily. Days bled into a week, each morning bringing with it a fresh wave of apprehension as Sarah waited to see what new horrors or revelations Maya's small hands would conjure onto paper. The initial drawing of the red scarf and the geode remained tacked to the refrigerator, a constant, silent reproach, a reminder of the mystery that had resurfaced with such jarring immediacy. Maya, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrent of tension that now permeated their home, continued to draw with an unnerving focus during her quiet playtime. One afternoon, as rain lashed against the window panes, creating a mournful, rhythmic drumming that mirrored the disquiet in Sarah's heart. Maya presented a new picture. This one was darker, the crayon strokes more frantic, more aggressive. The familiar stick figure of Lily was there, still small, still surrounded by those menacing claw-like trees. But this time there was another figure, tall, shadowy, rendered in thick, angry black crayon. It loomed over the smaller girl. And from its crudely drawn face, one detail leaped out at Sarah with the force of a physical blow. A single, stark white square amidst the black, positioned where a tooth should be, but exaggerated, twisted, almost like a snarl. A crooked tooth. Sarah's blood ran cold, a glacial tide washing through her veins, leaving her numb and breathless. She stared at the drawing, her mind reeling, trying to process the impossible. A man with a crooked tooth. The detail was so specific, so utterly random, yet it struck a chord deep within her, a discordant note of buried memory. Had there been someone like that at the camp? She racked her brain, sifting through the hazy recollections of 10 years past. The counselors, the church volunteers, the groundskeeper, their faces were a blur, softened and distorted by time and trauma. No one with such a distinct, memorable feature came to mind. And certainly, no such description had ever surfaced in the police investigation, not in any of the official reports or the countless newspaper articles she had obsessively collected and reread until the print faded. If such a man had been present, involved, surely someone would have remembered, someone would have spoken up. Unless he was someone Lily had encountered alone, in those terrifying final moments before the forest swallowed her whole. Someone only Lily had seen. The thought was a venomous serpent coiling in her stomach, its fangs dripping ice. "Maya, can you tell me about this man?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully neutral, betraying none of the turmoil that churned within her. Maya traced the outline of the shadowy figure with her fingertip. "He's the one who made her sad," she said simply. "He wouldn't let her leave the dark trees. He had a shiny tooth that wasn't straight. A shiny tooth. Not just crooked, but shiny. Was it a gold tooth? A cap?" Another layer of chilling specificity. Sarah felt the familiar tendrils of helplessness wrap around her, the same suffocating despair she'd experienced in the days and weeks following Lily's disappearance. The police had done their best, she knew, or at least she had tried to believe they had. They'd interviewed everyone at the camp, searched the grounds meticulously, followed up on the scant, useless leads. But the forest was vast, the trails myriad and confusing, and Lily, it seemed, had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but a lingering scent for the dogs to lose and a gaping hole in the lives of those who loved her. Theories had abounded. She'd gotten lost and succumbed to the elements. She'd been attacked by a wild animal. She'd run away, though no one could fathom why or where she would go. The darker, unspoken possibility of abduction had hung heavy in the air, but with no ransom demand, no witnesses, no evidence, it too had remained just another agonizing conjecture. Now, this drawing, this man, this crooked, shiny tooth. It felt like a piece of a puzzle she hadn't even known was missing, a grotesque, disturbing shape that hinted at a narrative far more sinister than simple misadventure. Driven by a desperate, gnawing urgency that bordered on obsession, Sarah found herself descending into the cold, dusty silence of her attic, a place she usually avoided, a repository of forgotten things and painful memories. She was searching for a specific box, a cardboard sarcophagus filled with the relics of Lily's disappearance, old newspaper clippings, faded flyers with Lily's smiling face, her own tear-stained journals from that terrible time, and a slim file containing copies of the official police reports she'd painstakingly obtained years ago, hoping to find some overlooked clue, some detail that would make sense of the senseless. The air in the attic was thick with the scent of aged paper and desolation. Cobwebs, like ghostly shrouds, clung to the rafters, and the single bare bulb cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. After several minutes of shifting dusty trunks and forgotten relics of a life before Lily vanished, she found it tucked away in a dark corner, its lid sealed with brittle, yellowed tape. Her hands trembled as she sliced it open with a pair of old scissors, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. Inside, the contents lay undisturbed, a time capsule of grief and unanswered questions. She pulled out the police file first, its manila cover soft and worn at the edges. Flipping through the typewritten pages, her eyes scanned the familiar, sterile language, the dispassionate recitation of facts and witness statements, counselor testimonies, search grid patterns, lists of items found, none of them Lily's. The official narrative was stark, unilluminating. Lily Matheson, age 13, last seen walking west from the main campfire at approximately 9:15 p.m. Extensive search yielded no trace. Case remains open. Open but cold. So very cold. Then she turned to her own journals, the pages filled with her frantic looping handwriting, stained with tears and smudged with exhaustion. Her younger self cried out from those pages, a raw, unfiltered agony that time had dulled but never erased. She wrote of the camp, the counselors, the other girls, her memories of Lily's last hours, her last words. Sarah scanned page after page, her heart pounding, searching for any mention, any hint of a man with a crooked tooth, a shiny tooth. Nothing. The faces she described were familiar, accounted for. The groundskeeper, old Mr. Henderson, had a kind, weathered face and missing teeth, not a crooked one. Pastor Davies, who led the retreat, had perfect, gleaming white teeth, a reassuring smile that now seemed, in retrospect, perhaps a little too polished. None of the teenage boys from the Brother Church group who had been camping nearby matched such a description in her recollections or the police interviews. She spread Maya's drawing of the shadowy figure on the dusty floorboards beside the official reports. The contrast was jarring, the child's primitive, intuitive rendering against the cold, hard bureaucracy of the investigation. The drawing felt more alive, more terrifyingly real than any of the typed words. The scarf, the geode. Maya had been impossibly, inexplicably accurate about those. What if she was right about this too? What if this man, this specter with the twisted smile, was the key? A detail overlooked, unseen, known only to Lily in her final desperate moments. A cold dread seeped into Sarah's bones. If this man was real, and if he was connected to Lily's disappearance, then her friend hadn't just wandered off and gotten lost. She had met someone dangerous. The implications were horrifying, shifting the narrative from tragic accident to something far more sinister, something actively malevolent. Sarah's gaze fell upon a small Ziploc bag within the box. Inside were a few precious mementos she'd salvaged from Lily's side of their shared cabin room after the initial search, a half-finished friendship bracelet, a tube of strawberry lip balm, a dog-eared copy of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Mundane objects, now imbued with an unbearable poignancy. There was also a small, cheap instant camera Lily had brought to camp, one Sarah had completely forgotten. Had the police even looked at it? She didn't remember. Quickly, she fumbled with the camera's flimsy back. Empty. Of course. If there had been film, surely the police would have developed it. Unless Lily had used up the film and taken it out to be developed, a role that was now lost to time. The attic suddenly felt suffocating, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. She gathered the files, the journal, Maya's disturbing drawing. The truth, or some fragment of it, lay hidden in these disparate pieces. She was sure of it. And her daughter, her innocent, unknowing daughter, was somehow pointing the way. The thought was both a comfort and a terror. The unsettling specificity of Maya's drawings continued to escalate, each new image a fresh stab of ice into Sarah's heart. A few days after the appearance of the crooked-toothed man, Maya sat at the kitchen table, her tongue poking out in concentration, meticulously drawing a tree. Not just any tree, but a distinctive, gnarled oak Sarah vaguely remembered from the periphery of the Camp Redemption grounds, one with a peculiar lightning scar twisting down its trunk like a white, frozen serpent. But it was the perspective that made Sarah's breath catch. Maya had drawn it as if viewed from below, looking up, with a small, crudely drawn bird's nest tucked into a crook of its branches, a detail Sarah herself had never noticed, had no memory of. It was the kind of detail someone lying on the ground beneath the tree might see, someone small, perhaps, looking for shelter, or hiding, or someone fallen. "Lily in my dream. She likes this tree," Maya announced without looking up, her crayon scraping methodically. She said she climbed it once, to see far away, but then she got stuck. Stuck? Sarah's voice was a dry whisper. Stuck how? Maya shrugged, a small, childlike gesture that seemed horribly incongruous with the gravity of her words. Just stuck. Her red scarf was caught on a branch. She couldn't get down. Her scarf caught. Sarah's mind raced. Had Lily tried to climb a tree? It was plausible. Lily had always been the more adventurous one, the daredevil. If her scarf had snagged, and she'd panicked, but surely the search parties would have found her then, in a tree, relatively close to the main camp, unless it wasn't just any tree. Unless it was this specific tree, perhaps further off the beaten path than anyone had thought to look with such scrutiny. The police reports mentioned that searchers had covered the immediate forested areas, but the woods around Camp Redemption were vast, sprawling for miles, merging with state forest land. It was possible, terrifyingly possible, that a small girl, injured or trapped in a tree, could have been missed, especially if she was beyond the initial, most concentrated search radius. Sarah felt a growing unease, a sense of being pulled into a narrative that was not her own, yet was intimately tied to her deepest wound. She was terrified for Maya, for the strange, inexplicable burden her daughter seemed to be carrying, channeling these visions, these memories that were not hers. She consulted a pediatrician, a child psychologist, desperate for a rational explanation. They spoke of vivid imaginations, of stress, of the way children process stories they overhear. But none of them could account for the chilling accuracy, the details Maya couldn't have known, details Sarah herself had forgotten or never registered. The psychologist suggested gently that perhaps Sarah was projecting her own unresolved trauma onto her daughter's innocent drawings. The suggestion stung, but Sarah couldn't entirely dismiss it. Was she losing her grip on reality, seeing ghosts where there were only crayon marks? Yet, the red of the scarf, the glint of the geode, the crooked tooth, the lightning-scarred oak viewed from below, they were too specific, too uncannily precise. These weren't the vague, malleable images of a typical childhood nightmare. They felt like fragments of a witnessed event, filtered through a child's perception but retaining their core, horrifying truth. One evening, Maya came to her, her small face pale, her eyes wide with a fear that was starkly different from her usual calm pronouncements. She clutched a new drawing, this one hurried, chaotic, the colors muddy and smeared. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. The dream was loud tonight. There was shouting. The bad man was angry. Lily was crying. She drew a building. Sarah looked at the paper. Amidst the chaotic scribbles, a distinct structure began to emerge. A small, simple building with a sharply peaked roof and a narrow, arched window, half hidden by what looked like dense, encroaching foliage. It was not any of the familiar cabins or halls of Camp Redemption. It looked older, more isolated. A chapel, perhaps? But there was no chapel on any map of the campgrounds Sarah had ever seen. No mention of such a structure in any of the official documents or her own memories. It was entirely unfamiliar. The drawing of the unfamiliar building, the one Maya called the quiet house in the trees, became Sarah's new obsession. She stared at it for hours, the crude lines and unsettling aura of the place seeping into her thoughts, haunting her waking moments and invading her already troubled sleep. A small, peaked roof structure with an arched window, nestled in dense woods. It felt significant, a missing piece that might connect the other horrifying fragments Maya had channeled. Sarah pulled out her old box of Camp Redemption memorabilia again, this time searching for anything, any map, any brochure, any casual snapshot that might show such a building. The camp had been run by the church for decades, its layout evolving slowly over time. Perhaps it was an older structure, long abandoned and forgotten, swallowed by the encroaching forest, erased from official records but lingering in the earth like a stubborn root. She found old pamphlets with hand-drawn maps showing the mess hall, the cabins, the lake, the main trails. No chapel, no unfamiliar outbuilding matching Maya's drawing. She remembered the campgrounds vividly, or so she thought. The wide, grassy field where they played games, the dusty paths leading to the different activity areas, the dense perimeter of pine and fir trees that marked the boundary between the curated safety of the camp and the wild, untamed wilderness beyond. She could almost smell the pine needles and damp earth, hear the distant laughter of children and the strumming of a guitar by the campfire. But no image of this quiet house surfaced in her memory. It was as if it existed only in Maya's dreams, a spectral edifice conjured from the ether of Lily's lost experiences. Maya, meanwhile, seemed increasingly burdened by her nocturnal visions. She grew quieter, more withdrawn, her bright, bubbly energy dimming. Dark circles appeared beneath her eyes. She would often wake crying, not from a nightmare she could articulate, but from a pervasive sense of sadness, a lingering chill that clung to her like the forest mist. "Lily's lonely," she would whisper, her small hand clutching Sarah's. "She wants to come home from the quiet house." The words were a knife twisting in Sarah's gut. The guilt, always simmering beneath the surface, flared with renewed intensity. Had she failed Lily not just 10 years ago, but now, by not understanding, not acting sooner on these disturbing clues her own daughter was providing? The weight of responsibility was immense. One afternoon, while Maya was napping, Sarah found herself staring at the drawing of the chapel again. The way Maya had drawn the trees around it, they were not the relatively sparse pines of the main camp area, but denser, older-looking, with thick undergrowth. It suggested a more remote location, deeper in the woods, perhaps in a part of the surrounding state forest land that had once, long ago, been part of the church's property before the official camp boundaries were formalized. An old parish map, county records? The thought spurred her to action. She spent hours online, delving into historical archives, county plat maps, old church congregation records, anything that might show the original extent of the land owned by the church that established Camp Redemption. It was a frustrating, labyrinthine search, filled with dead ends and archaic documents. But then she found it, a faded, digitized copy of a hand-drawn survey map from the early 1940s, decades before Camp Redemption was officially established in its current form. The map depicted a much larger tract of land, and there, tucked away in a densely wooded northern section, marked with a tiny, almost indecipherable cross, was a small rectangle labeled simply Meditation Chapel. It was far from the area that would later become the main camp, accessible only by what looked like a faint, unmaintained trail. A shiver traced its way down Sarah's spine. A meditation chapel, a quiet house in the trees. It existed, or at least, it had existed once. Was it still standing? Overgrown, forgotten, a silent stone witness to secrets buried for decades? The possibility was electrifying, Terrifying. This was it. This had to be it. The place from Maya's dreams, the place Lily had perhaps encountered, the place where answers, however horrifying, might finally be found. The decision to return to the vicinity of Camp Redemption was not made lightly. It tore at Sarah a visceral conflict between the fierce, primal urge to protect her daughter from further psychic entanglement and the equally powerful, long-suppressed need to find answers for Lily, for herself. Maya's well-being was paramount. Yet the drawings, the details, the undeniable connection to Lily's last moments had become a siren song too potent to ignore. She couldn't live with the not knowing, not anymore, not when the truth felt so tantalizingly, terrifyingly close. The thought of dragging Maya back to that place, even to the general area, was unbearable. This was her burden to carry, her ghost to confront. She arranged for Maya to stay with her sister for a few days, concocting a vague story about needing to attend to some old, unresolved business, a phrase that felt chillingly accurate. Her sister, bless her unquestioning heart, agreed readily, perhaps sensing the deep, unspoken turmoil in Sarah's voice. The drive north, towards the familiar, dreaded region of the Whispering Pines, was a journey through a landscape of memory and trepidation. Every mile closer to the turnoff for the old camp road tightened the knot of anxiety in Sarah's stomach. The town nearest the camp, once a sleepy little village, had grown slightly. A few more chain stores, a new gas station, but the overarching sense of rural isolation remained. The trees still loomed, ancient and indifferent, their shadows stretching long and cool across the asphalt even in the midday sun. She parked her car at a small, dilapidated trailhead, a few miles from the current Camp Redemption site, a spot she'd identified from comparing the old survey map with modern satellite imagery. The original meditation chapel, if it still stood, would be deep within this section of state forest, a rugged, unpaved area far from any designated recreational trails. She had Maya's drawings clutched in her hand, the lightning-scarred oak, the crooked-toothed man, and most importantly, the eerie depiction of the chapel itself. These were her only guides, fragile paper breadcrumbs leading into a wilderness that had already claimed one precious life. The air was cooler here, beneath the dense canopy, the sunlight filtering through in dappled, shifting patterns. The silence was profound, broken only by the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, and the frantic thumping of her own heart. It was a silence that felt watchful, expectant. She pushed her way through the undergrowth, the old survey map and Maya's drawing of the chapel her only guides. The terrain was difficult, uneven, thick with fallen logs and tangled bushes. Doubt gnawed at her. What if the chapel was long gone, rotted into the earth, leaving no trace? What if this was a fool's errand, born of grief and a child's overactive imagination? But the specificity of Maya's visions, the sheer impossibility of her knowing those details, spurred Sarah onward. She looked for the lightning-scarred oak Maya had drawn. According to the child's dream memory, it was a landmark, a point of reference. After nearly an hour of pushing through dense thickets, her clothes snagging on thorns, her face damp with sweat and trepidation, she saw it. Rising from a small clearing, gnarled and ancient, was an oak tree, its trunk bearing a vivid, jagged scar, exactly as Maya had depicted it. And there, nestled in a crook of its upper branches, was a large, dilapidated bird's nest. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was real, just as her daughter had dreamed it, had drawn it. Lily had been here. She felt a wave of dizziness, the forest floor seeming to tilt beneath her feet. She leaned against the scarred trunk, her hand tracing the rough bark, imagining Lily, small and terrified, perhaps trying to climb this very tree, her red scarf snagging, her cries for help swallowed by the indifferent woods. From this vantage point, following the vague directionality suggested by the old survey map and the orientation of the chapel in Maya's drawing relative to the oak, Sarah pressed on. The forest grew denser, the light dimmer. It felt as if she were stepping back in time, into a place untouched by the modern world, a place where secrets could fester undisturbed for decades. And then, through a tangle of ivy and overgrown rhododendrons, she saw it, a sliver of dark weathered wood, a sharply peaked roofline, just visible above the rampant greenery. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the quiet house in the trees. Pushing aside a thick curtain of ancient ivy, its leaves cool and damp against her skin, Sarah stepped into a small, shadowed clearing, and there it stood, the chapel. It was smaller than she'd imagined from Maya's drawing, more dilapidated, yet unmistakably the same structure. Weathered gray planks, buckled and stained with decades of rain and neglect, formed its simple walls. The peaked roof sagged precariously in the middle, patched in places with rusted tin. The narrow, arched window Maya had drawn was still there, though several panes of its glass were missing, like vacant eyes staring out from a forgotten face. A heavy, crudely made wooden door, its iron hinges, orange with rust, hung crookedly in its frame, slightly ajar, beckoning into the gloom within. The air around the chapel was heavy, still, thick with the scent of decay, damp earth, and something else, something acrid and unsettling, like old ashes and stale fear. It was profoundly silent, the kind of silence that presses in on your ears, amplifying the sound of your own breathing, your own racing pulse. This place felt wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. A place of sorrow, of secrets left to molder in the dark. For a long moment, Sarah simply stood there, frozen, Maya's drawing clutched in her trembling hand. The resemblance was uncanny, chilling. This forgotten, derelict building, hidden deep in the uncaring forest, was the quiet house from her daughter's dreams, the place Lily had been, the place Lily, perhaps, had never left. Steeling herself, drawing on a reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed, Sarah moved towards the door. It groaned in protest. As she pushed it further open, the sound like a dying breath exhaled into the waiting silence. The interior was dark, the only light filtering through the broken panes of the arched window and the gaps in the decaying roof, illuminating swirling dust motes like lost souls. The smell inside was even stronger, a cloying mix of mildew, rotten wood, and that same faint disturbing undercurrent of old ashes. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out the basic structure. A single small room, perhaps 20 feet square. A few rough-hewn wooden pews, overturned and broken, lay scattered across the dirt floor. At the far end, a simple wooden altar, tilted and covered in a thick layer of grime and cobwebs, was barely visible. But it wasn't the desolation that gripped her with icy fear. It was something else. Something on the floor, near the altar, half hidden in the shadows. A splash of color, a dull, faded, unmistakable crimson. Her breath hitched. Moving as if in a dream, a nightmare from which she couldn't awaken, Sarah slowly approached. Her footfalls, soft on the packed earth, seemed to echo unnaturally in the oppressive stillness. The crimson shape resolved itself. It was fabric, woolen fabric, matted and stiff with age and exposure, partially buried beneath a thin layer of dirt and debris. And tangled within it, almost invisible against the dark earth, were tiny, glittering fragments, purple, amethyst fragments. Sarah sank to her knees, her hand reaching out, trembling. She didn't need to touch it to know. The red scarf, Lily's red scarf, and scattered around it, like fallen stars, the shattered remains of her precious geode. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, hot and stinging, blurring her vision. Lily had been here. This was where her journey had ended. This forsaken, forgotten place. But there was more. Scratched into the grimy wooden surface of the nearest overturned pew, almost invisible in the dim light, were letters, words, desperate, childlike etchings, Lily's name. And beneath it, A single, frantically carved word, help, and then another set of initials, crudely gouged into the wood. J.T. J.T. Who was J.T.? The name meant nothing to her. But then, her gaze fell upon something else. Something tucked into a dark crevice between two of the floorboards. Something that glinted dully in a stray beam of weak sunlight. She reached for it, her fingers closing around cold, smooth metal. She pulled it free. It was a lighter, an old, tarnished Zippo. And engraved on its side, almost worn away but still legible, was a crudely etched image, a single prominent tooth, twisted at an unnatural angle, the crooked tooth. The world tilted, a nauseating lurch as the pieces clicked into place with horrifying, sickening precision. The crooked-toothed man from Maya's drawings. J.T., the initials on the pew. This lighter, his lighter, dropped here, in this place of Lily's final terror. He was real. He had been here, with Lily. The air in the chapel grew thick, suffocating. Each breath Sarah drew tasting of dust and despair and the metallic tang of ancient fear. The faded red of the scarf seemed to pulse in the dim light, a silent scream from the past. Lily hadn't just wandered off. She hadn't just gotten lost. She had been brought here, to this isolated, hidden place, by him, by J.T., the man with the crooked, shiny tooth. Who was he? A random predator who had stumbled upon a vulnerable girl in the woods? Or someone connected to the camp, to the church, someone who knew of this forgotten chapel, this perfect place to commit an atrocity, hidden from the world? The question swirled in Sarah's mind, a chaotic vortex of horror and dawning, terrible understanding. She looked around the small, derelict room, seeing it now not just as a place of decay, but as a tomb, a scene of unimaginable suffering. The overturned pews, the scratched pleas for help, the lingering scent of old ashes. Did that mean fire? Had he tried to burn something? Evidence? Or worse? Her gaze was drawn back to the altar. There was a section of the dirt floor just in front of it that looked disturbed. Darker, more compacted, as if something had been buried and then unearthed, or perhaps something had decomposed into the soil over a long, terrible time. The thought was unbearable. She couldn't bring herself to look closer, to confirm the ultimate, unspoken horror that now screamed in her mind. It was enough. Knowing Lily had been here, knowing she had suffered, knowing she had not been alone in her fear but with him, this monster, J.T., the name burned itself into her brain. She had to tell someone. The police. This wasn't a cold case anymore. This was a crime scene, a decade old, but a crime scene nonetheless. The lighter was heavy in her hand, cold, damning proof. She carefully placed it, along with the tattered fragment of the scarf and a few pieces of the shattered geode, into an evidence bag she'd had the foresight, or perhaps the grim intuition, to bring in her backpack. Her movements were mechanical, detached, a part of her observing herself from a great distance, as if this were happening to someone else. But the grief was undeniably hers, a fresh, raw agony that tore through the scar tissue of 10 years, as if Lily had been lost only yesterday. As she stood to leave, her eyes, now accustomed to the gloom, caught something else. Tucked into a crack in the decaying wall near the door, almost as if deliberately hidden, was a small folded piece of paper. It was brittle, yellowed with age, the creases threatening to fall apart. With infinite care, Sarah unfolded it. It was a drawing, a child's drawing, done in crayon, the colors faded but still discernible. It depicted a stick-figure girl with auburn hair, wearing a red scarf, standing beside a taller, shadowy figure with a single, prominent crooked tooth. They were standing in front of a small building with a peaked roof and an arched window. Lily's drawing. Lily had drawn her captor, her prison. A desperate message in a bottle, left in this forgotten place, hoping against hope that someone, someday, would find it, would understand. And beneath the drawing, in shaky, childlike print, were 2 words, "Bad Man," and then again the initials, J.T. Sarah sank back against the rough wooden wall, the drawing clutched to her chest, a choked sob finally escaping her. Lily had tried to tell them. She had left clues, her own desperate testimony, in the very place she had been held, and for 10 years, her voice had been silenced, her story buried along with her. But now, thanks to Maya, thanks to an inexplicable connection that transcended time and death, Lily's voice was finally being heard. The aftermath was a blur of police tape and solemn-faced detectives, of hushed questions, and the grim, methodical work of forensic teams sifting through the decaying remnants of the hidden chapel. Sarah, wrapped in a borrowed blanket despite the mild autumn air, sat in the back of a police cruiser, watching the activity with a numb detachment. She had led them here, to Lily's final resting place, to the irrefutable evidence of her murder. The discovery of Lily's drawing, along with the lighter and the other items, had galvanized the local authorities. The old, cold case of Lily Matheson's disappearance was now an active homicide investigation. The disturbed earth before the altar yielded its tragic secret, confirming Sarah's worst fears. Lily had been there all along, buried in a shallow, unmarked grave, her small bones a testament to a decade of silence and sorrow. The identity of J.T. became the immediate focus. Old camp records were scrutinized, local databases cross-referenced. The crooked tooth, the shiny tooth Maya had described, was a distinct feature. Within days, they had a name, Joseph Tanner. A drifter, a handyman with a minor criminal record who had done some sporadic, off-the-books work for various properties in the area around the time Lily disappeared. He'd done a few odd jobs at Camp Redemption itself, clearing brush, repairing a leaky roof, just weeks before that fateful church retreat. He was known for a surly demeanor and a distinctive gold cap on a crooked front incisor. He had vanished from the area shortly after Lily went missing, never questioned, never suspected, until now. Finding him after 10 years was another challenge, but the police were relentless. He was eventually tracked down to a grimy halfway house in another state, older, sicker, but alive. The evidence from the chapel, combined with his sudden departure and the uncanny accuracy of the descriptions, now corroborated by Sarah's account of Maya's drawings, was enough. Joseph Tanner was arrested and charged with the abduction and murder of Lily Matheson. There would be a trial, a long and arduous process, but Sarah knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her weary soul, that justice, however delayed, would finally be served. Closure, however, was a more complicated thing. The raw, gaping wound of Lily's loss would never fully heal, but the gnawing uncertainty, the torment of not knowing, had been replaced by a terrible, clarifying truth. Lily was gone, stolen from them by an act of senseless brutality, but she was no longer lost in the vast, indifferent wilderness. She had been found. She could finally be laid to rest properly, mourned with the dignity she deserved. Sarah held Maya close that night, her daughter's small, warm body, a comforting anchor in the storm of her emotions. Maya didn't fully understand the grim adult realities that had unfolded, but she knew, with a child's profound intuition, that something important, something sad, but also something releasing, had happened. The dreams of Lily had stopped. The quiet house in the trees no longer haunted her sleep. "Mommy," Maya whispered, her voice sleepy. "Lily's not cold anymore. Is she with the angels now?" "Yes, sweetie," Sarah murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears, stroking Maya's hair. "Yes, she is. She's at peace." And in that moment, looking at her own daughter, this miraculous child who had bridged the chasm between the living and the lost, Sarah felt a flicker of something akin to peace herself. The darkness of the past 10 years would always be a part of her, a shadow clinging to her heart, but it no longer consumed her. Lily's memory would live on, not as a question mark, but as a testament to a life cut short, a friendship cherished, and a love that even death could not entirely extinguish. The red scarf, a symbol of terror and loss, would now also become a symbol of an unbreakable bond, a thread of connection that had, against all odds, led to the truth, bringing a measure of bittersweet solace to a grief that had endured for far too long. The forest still whispered its secrets, but now, one of its darkest had finally been brought into the light.